Today on the Cody Goggin Show, it's Wrestlemania 1. Hello, I'm your host, Cody Goggin. In the mid-1980s, Vincent Kennedy McMahon conceived an idea that would change the landscape of professional wrestling forever. This is the story of Wrestlemania 1. Vince McMahon's grandfather, Jess McMahon, had been a well-known boxing and wrestling promoter in the New York City area as far back as the 1920s. But it was in the 1950s that the Capitol Wrestling Corporation was founded. For years, Jess McMahon's son, Vincent J. McMahon, would run the company in close association with the National Wrestling Alliance. Often, Vince Sr. held control of the NWA's board. But a dispute led Capitol Wrestling to split from the NWA and to create their own championship title for a new company that they called the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, or WWF. Champions such as Buddy Rogers and Bruno Sammartino were notable stars during this time up through the 1970s. In 1979, the company's name was shortened to just the World Wrestling Federation, or WWF. That same year, Vince Jr. founded Titan Sports. It was through Titan Sports that Vince would eventually absorb the WWF in 1982, in a deal struck with his father that saw him borrowing money and going into business with Gorilla Monsoon in Arnold, Scotland. By 1983, Vince owned the company outright for the price of around $1 million. McMahon almost immediately withdrew any association with the National Wrestling Alliance, a decision that his father said might find him at the bottom of the river. The promoters of the various wrestling companies and territories at the time were notoriously respectful of a certain boundary between where they promoted their events and how they handled their performers. But Vince saw no reason to stick to this time-honored tradition. Quickly, he secured syndicated television rights deals across the country, and the WWF found itself on TV in other promoters' territory. Vince's next plan of action was to secure contracts with some of the top stars appearing in other companies. Hulk Hogan had been in the AWA around the time he appeared in Rocky III. But Vince wrangled the Hulkster back to the WWF, and Hogan would become the foundation that WrestleMania and the WWF would be built on. Roddy Piper, the Iron Sheik, Paul Orndorff, Greg Valentine, Ricky Steamboat, and more would also sign with Vince. All of this in addition to massive attractions already with the company, such as Jimmy Superfly Snuka and Andre the Giant. But the NWA had plans as well. Their 1983 event, Starrcade, was intended to be the biggest show in wrestling, featuring a huge main event that found Ric Flair defeating Harley Race for their World Heavyweight title. The event may have sparked McMahon's imagination. His concept for WrestleMania was similar to that of the Super Bowl or the World Series, meant to be a capping off to the wrestling season and featuring its biggest matches. McMahon also wanted to draw the interest of non-wrestling fans. Hulk Hogan had won the WWF Championship in 1984 from the Iron Sheik, and also was beginning to appear on television talk shows. Champions like Bruno Sammartino and Bob Backlund had been quite different than the Hulkster. His charisma and comic book physique created a turn in the WWF that would lead into more animated storylines and characters. In addition to this, McMahon enlisted mainstream star power to draw attention to his wrestling event. Promotional tie-ins with MTV began, with Lou Albano appearing in a Cyndi Lauper music video. Lauper would appear on WWF TV alongside Wendy Richter. During an interview with Richard Belzer, Hogan would seemingly cause Belzer to pass out when he was asked to demonstrate a wrestling hold. A lawsuit would follow, but the entire situation would ultimately draw further interest to the WWF. Mr. T was taking television by storm and began appearing with Hulk Hogan in various vignettes and promotional videos that ultimately led to a confrontation with Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. The night before WrestleMania, Hogan and Mr. T hosted Saturday Night Live, again driving outside interest to the wrestling product. WrestleMania 1 finally took place on March 31st, 1985, at Madison Square Garden in New York City. The crowd was reported to be over 19,000 people in attendance, and it was watched by over 1 million people across the country on closed-circuit television. At the time, this was the largest viewing audience for a wrestling pay-per-view ever. Mean Gene Okerlund would start the night off with a performance of the national anthem. He was reportedly not the original intended performer for this segment, but the original artist backed out, and it was never revealed who this had been. The Executioner Buddy Rose would face Tito Santana in the match that began the legacy of WrestleMania. Santana would emerge victorious. This was followed by a very quick match between King Kong Bundy and Special Delivery Jones. Bundy would defeat Jones in record time. This was the shortest match in WrestleMania history until it was broken by The Rock at WrestleMania 32. Ricky Steamboat would score a win against Matt Bourne. Later in his career, Bourne would be known for his portrayal of the Doink the Clown character. David Sammartino would be accompanied by his father Bruno to the ring, but his match with Brutus Beefcake would be ruled a no contest. Greg the Hammer Valentine would enter the first championship match held at WrestleMania as the Intercontinental Champion. His opponent was the Junkyard Dog. In the Dog's corner was legendary manager Jimmy Hart. Junkyard Dog would win the match as the result of a countout, but due to the rules surrounding countouts, Valentine remained champion. Next, Mike Rotundo and Barry Windham would put their tag team championships on the line against Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik. The Sheik would use manager Freddie Blassie's cane to secure the victory and become the new tag team champions. He and Volkov would be the first people to win a championship at WrestleMania. The following bout on the card was a body slam challenge between Andre the Giant and Big John Studd. Both men were among the largest competitors in the WWF, and Andre was putting his career on the line. If Andre managed to body slam his opponent, John Studd and his manager, Bobby Heenan, would pay Andre $15,000 in cash. Andre secured the win and began throwing his prize money into the crowd, just before Heenan managed to steal it back and escape to the locker room area. Wendy Richter defeated Leilani Kai in a match that saw her accompanied by Cyndi Lauper, and Kai supported by the fabulous Moolah. With her win, Wendy Richter became the women's champion. This was followed by the heavily promoted main event. Hulk Hogan and Mr. T would have Jimmy Snuka in their corner as they squared off with Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Cowboy Bob Orton would be in the corner of Piper and Orndorff. Star power would abound in the main event. Liberace would serve as the guest timekeeper for the match, and Muhammad Ali would be on the ringside floor as a special guest referee. Billy Martin, who was the manager of the New York Yankees, was guest ring announcer. Throughout the night, commentary was handled by Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura. After a rousing battle that saw multiple interferences and turning of tides, including Muhammad Ali punching Roddy Piper, Hogan and Mr. T would win the match. With WrestleMania 1 in the books and most of WWF's future leveraged on its success, McMahon had pulled off a miracle. Soon he would get wrestling back on network television with Saturday night's main event on NBC, and the boom connection between rock and roll and wrestling would continue into the late 1980s and early 1990s. Hulk Hogan would go on to become one of the biggest stars in the world, and WrestleMania would continue every year to this very day. Thanks for watching the show, and I hope you'll leave a like and a comment below. Until next time, I'm Cody Goggin.